Good evening. Sorry I couldn't be with you this evening. However, there's Zoom and the wonders of now's technology. I think most of you, or if you're at all familiar with the park history and the history of the homestead up there, everyone's relatively familiar with my dad. But I was thinking that maybe I needed to talk a little more about my mom. Those who read Mrs. Cairns' books years ago, she was pretty accurate. She was one of the few that were really accurate at that time about a lot of the people. And she talked about my grandmother as well as my mom. My mom and Grandma Patty were dear, dear friends early on. Where Grandma Patty's house had been, my mom's house after she was born was about 4 doors south of there. Originally, my grandmother had a home on the east side of Grand Lake. And I don't know much about that. But they had sold it and they had moved over to the house over by Patty's. Anyway, one of the things that I gave to the Historical Society, I guess it was 4 years or so ago, I had my mother's swimming suit from when she was about 10, and that would have been mid-1900s or so, 1915, 1916, somewhere in there. And my niece Julia, who is there tonight, she's small and very slight, and she got into it and was parading it. But in addition, I have a picture of my mother at the time when she was very young. This is out by the cabin doors, I believe.
And what year would you say?
So I thought that might be of interest.
What year would you say that is?
I would say that's like 1914, 15. Mom was born in 2007. So if she was 10, it'd be 2017. I mean, wow, 1917. So anyway, that was back then. And my mother spent every summer there. She, in her teen years, she worked at the corner cupboard for the Roans and made marvelous ice cream sodas and shakes and floats. Every once in a while, Carolyn Roan and my mother would talk about some of the desserts from there and would make one of them, which was a slab of brownie, a slab of ice cream, bunch of chocolate syrup, and it's all done twice, and that's dessert. So it was pretty filling. Anyway, as the years went by, my mom had gone to college, and she wasn't really interested in those things that she should have been interested in as a proper young lady. She really didn't like the city that much. She and her parents weren't the best of friends. And Mom spent her first year out of college in New York City and really disliked it. So she came to Colorado again in the summer, and then she didn't leave. And she really didn't leave because eventually she married my father. Their honeymoon, interestingly enough, was about an 8-day pack trip. And my mom, years later, was still angry at her mother-in-law because they had stopped somewhere, I think over in Estes Park, and had used a telephone to call her in Denver and tell her where they were and that they were fine. And she told them they had to get home because she was giving them a welcome home party the next day and they had to be there. My mom never did forget Grandma for that one. Anyway, the next picture I have is a picture of my mother with my brother and my sister when they were very, very small.
What was your mother's maiden name?
My mother's maiden name was Caroline Elizabeth Pratt. Her mother was a Lee and married into the Pratt family in Kansas City, Missouri, where they lived. My grandfather had various things that he did. He ran a lumberyard. I think there was a produce place. There's a lot of merchandising of foods and staples, not in a store so much as in shipping it to other people. He was a tall, spare man, and he would come out and ride. They used to obviously come out in the summertime, his mother-in-law and a lot of the family. And there are some pictures of his family, his brothers. They were walking around Grand Lake in different places. He was fairly austere. I can remember as a young girl before he died in his 80s, he would go riding at the ranch. And for us, it just seemed really strange, and for probably anybody nowadays, it would be really strange. But he wore a three-piece wool suit and went horseback riding. So he was very proper. Back on my mom and raising a young family, another picture that I have is a little bit later than the first one I showed. And this one, I'm hoping it's big enough for everybody to see. Sorry, I don't have a presentation that's real formal. But my mom is there with my brother John and Virginia. And on the far side is Patience. And Grandma Katie was dear, dear to our hearts. Like I said, she had, and her mother had always been dear friends. The other two ladies, I don't have a clue, so if any of you have seen them and know them from 80 years ago, I'd be happy to know. We all did. My children grew up going to Grandma Patty's beach on Grand Lake. And of course, my mother was technically a summer person, but she knew everybody on the lake all the time, it seemed to me. She always knew who they all were. We didn't go often because the Dude Ranch was open. Anyway, Mom and Dad, well, Daddy and his mother, as I'm sure most everybody knows, they had basically started what became the main ranch because Grandma was tired of putting up with Grandpa's friends that came up to fish all summer. So they came and stayed, and Grandma, who was known for her cooking, would cook. And people started driving over through Rocky Mountain National Park, and they had kind of a little restaurant. And my dad talked about, Grandma would yell out the back door how many fish he needed for lunch. And at that time, he would go out to the river straight out from the cabin there, which was part of the main ranch eventually, and catch as many as he needed. And I remember him saying at some point that he had to catch something like 127 trout that day. It seems really amazing, but I also have some pictures of my grandfather, Dad's dad, with a huge string of fish. And of course, the fish were much more prolific, A, and B, they didn't have limits on everything. So it was always kind of a jockey, and then Dad would go out and get the game for stakes and whatever. I talked a bit about the supplies, and this is one of those things that sort of flows over from my dad's time in starting the ranch and he and my mother's time in the house that they built in 1951 or 2. My dad would talk about his first winter at the ranch. He and his dad figured how much they would need in flour, sugar, beans, and coffee. Well, I'm not sure of the exact dates. I think it is around 1917. If you remember, I said something about the picture mom. The original was when she was probably about 10 in 1917. And his dad would have been 15, let's see, he was 10 years older was he? But he would have been in his teens at that time. I always wondered about the kind of isolation that they had. That first winter, he said it snowed some portion of 120 days. And the snow was well over the roofs, the barns, everything, and they had to dig tunnels out to the animals to feed them and take care of them. And the isolation must have been really something for a teenage boy. They grew up in Denver, my dad and his sisters. They had, Grandma had a bar, Grandma and Grandpa had a bar down there, and they worked hard in that. So they were always busy, and there were lots of people, and they belonged to what was called the Turnverein. I believe there is still one in Denver, where the German peoples would get together. So anyway, it probably was really difficult for Daddy to be so terribly isolated, as well as just the newness of it, to be a kid in his mid-teens. And he had talked about one of the gals he saw from Kremlin when he first arrived on the train, and he was thinking that if they all were that pretty, maybe it wouldn't be too bad. We always had teams that would go to town to get stuff. And Dad used that as a training way for his horses. And I remember them telling us about getting a sled out and putting a green pair of workhorses on it. Dad had a burlap over their eyes and had them held pretty securely. He got up and got hold of the reins, and Mom was able to yank the burlap off their heads, and away they went. And they ran all the way to Grand Lake. Definitely tired, but they were a lot more manageable. And then he turned them around after getting the mail and came back. They did a lot of things like that.
What did they call the ranch?
My mom?
Back in those
I'm sorry?
What did they call the Holzwarth Ranch back in those days?
Holzwarth Ranch?
Okay, that was what it was. Okay.
Yeah. We had, I don't know, Al would remember, I'm sure, and I'm looking for it. I have a picture somewhere that is of the entrance sign. We had a huge sign at the entrance. Oh, here it is. We have these signs at the end of each driveway, but that was in the late 40s. And that's Holzwarth's Never Summer Ranch. Well, Never Summer Ranch park ground is what this one is. This was John and Mary's from their house years later. But it was the same kind of sign, looked the same, said Never Summer Ranch on it. Holzwarth's Never Summer Ranch, I believe. So back to the supplies. After Mom and Dad built the house, and I apologize, I know this jumps around decade-wise, but that's kind of my flow of consciousness, I guess. The winter supplies, even when I was a kid, were still kind of a major thing. Dad and Mom built the house in the early 50s. At the end of the summer, he and Mom would fill the basement with cases of food, canned goods, that kind of thing. In particular, Mom did not like our well water. It was very mineralized well water. And so they lined the west wall of the basement with Coca-Cola. And I do mean the whole wall. The wall was about 15 feet long, and the cases were about 6 high. One of the problems was Dad built the house in the old riverbed, much against my brother's wishes, because every spring when the snow melted, the river ran through the house. So everything in the basement was up on 6x4s, always. Freezers, everything. Back on the Coca-Cola though, in those days it was not quite as benign as it is now. And Mom would have been appalled to know that she was a drug addict from all the Cokes she drank. Another one of her beliefs was that you could not gossip. And Patty told me several times that even as small children, Mother wouldn't tolerate it. Unfortunately, some of her really good things like that didn't come down to me. My example of it was that when I came home from high school, I went to a private Presbyterian mission school in Utah, and the mail was no longer delivered daily. It was, I went to town to get the mail. And those of you that have been here long enough may know or remember Louise Stevens. And Louise was nosy. I had gone in one day to get some mail, and she hung on to one of the pieces, and she began to make comments about who the writer was and what she could see through the envelope. I was so angry. By the time I got home, I was really blowing up, and Mom told me I was not to say such awful things about Louise. And I railed on and on about her being gossipy and nosy, and Mom finally said, well, she does talk, which was about as strong as she ever got. Speaking of Louise, and moving up a bit on that, when Mom died in 1965, Mom had died Saturday night, and Sunday morning, my sister-in-law, my brother, and I were sitting around with Daddy, trying to figure out where we were going, what we were going to be doing. And the phone rang. It was Louise. She had some things she needed to talk over with Mom about church. So we had this quick conversation about who's going to talk to her. Finally, one of us did, and Louise was just really in an uproar and said, I'll be right up. For those of us who lived in the Park Service that far up, people didn't come to visit very often. We were expected to go there, so her coming was a big thing. Anyway, not long before she was due to arrive, my brother and dad went out to take care of the cattle, and they did not come back for quite a while. So Mary, my sister-in-law, and I were left to take care of Louise. Louise was upset, as were all of us. But she was just bubbling sitting there that morning, and the problem was, Mary would look at Louise and she'd grin and then look at me, and I'd look at Louise and I'd grin and look at Mary. And finally Louise was just really incensed with us. And, girls, whatever is the matter with you? And Mary said, did you get dressed in a hurry, Louise? And she said, well, you know I did. Why? Your suit's on the wrong side out. So we had to get her clothes changed around so she'd be comfortable and reasonable. Back in the 30s, however, I also have this picture of my dad that a lot of people might recognize something like this of him. But this was in the 30s, and it was taken by a cousin of mine. His wife was my mother's dear cousin. His name was Dr. Beale, who lived in New Mexico. I've always liked that picture of my dad. So, another story from that general time frame in the early 30s. There were very few phones available, as I think we all know, but there certainly were none at our ranch. The trading post up the road, 3 miles, and was part of the Phantom Valley Ranch. They had a phone, but it was not AT&T. Hunter L. Gary was vice president of Gary and Company. This company was involved in telephone manufacturing worldwide. AT&T was part of Gary and Company. Hunter lived near my maternal grandparents in Kansas City. He and my grandfather, Henry Pratt, were close friends. And the story I heard was that they would often get to drinking in the evening. And this one night they were drinking too much. And Hunter liked to call his friends all over the country because he had the wherewithal by phone lines to do so. And they wanted to call Carrie, as they called my mom. And he couldn't do it. And Hunter was very upset about that. The upshot of which was, the next summer, they laid a telephone line to the ranch. We got them. For us, the phone line was handy in different ways. There's probably a few in Grand County from my time frame that aren't too happy about it because the family down the road, the Lees, Kathy and I hung out a lot together, and entertainment was not near what it is today, and we would listen in on party line to see what was going on. Down the road at Green Mountain Ranch were the Nelsons, Ann, David, and their parents, Carl and Ada. It always seemed that Ann got to do pretty much what she was. She didn't seem to be as restrained as the rest of us. And that phone gave us a lot of scandalized information. Just terrible for that time frame, And for those who know Dave Cook, you can bug him about it. Other times, the phone line was definitely a lifeline. Probably not in the way most people would think, but there was a family at the Kawanichi Ranch, and they're all gone now. But at the time, it was a family of 3, mother and father and their grown son, Bob. Bob seemed to do pretty well, and then his dad died. And it seemed to have been the anchor for Bob. He drank lots. I remember Daddy taking me and stopping in hot sulfur one time at the jail to see him because he'd been drinking kerosene. Yeah, it's kind of stunning. Anyway, they lived at the Kawanichi Ranch, which is completely gone now. One of the things that happened was when Bob drank a lot, he was a mean drunk. And Mrs. Gill was sometimes very frightened. So she was able to talk to my dad, and they came up with a method. And I don't know what the words were, but she could call him on the phone. And because Bob, if he knew she was calling or heard the phone would click when somebody was on it, and he would pick it up and listen. So she could tell this sentence to my dad, and he would know he needed to come and help. In the meantime, he and Carl Nelson had had a conversation with the same information that Carl would come and help, so that the two of them, because Bob was a big man, as I recall, and they did get called a time or two. And they were a very tragic family, I think. Bob eventually died from the liquor, but in the meantime, he'd gotten sober at some point and married a lady whose name I'm sorry I don't remember. I remember liking her. And she and Bob had renovated one of their cabins for a year-round place to live. And she continued to live in that cabin after Bob died. She too passed away, supposedly from gas poisoning. And my mom always said she thought Mrs. Gill had done it to her, which I have nothing to say to prove it. That's just what Mom said. And she didn't often make unfounded comments that I ever heard. Mom was known for being pretty truthful. Back at the main ranch and things that were going on in the early 50s, this may be a picture that everybody's seen more often than not. This picture was in front of the lodge, and this is a picture of the whole family the year before my sister Ginny died. It was a publicity photo, and I have a whole bunch of different ones from all-day rides, from high points, from different things all over the valley. The barns were the center of our life. In this picture, can you see it? It's a picture of my brother with a bunch of the gear, the saddles. And the saddles and the bridles all had to be kept in very clean shape. Each of the horses had his own bridle with a headstall on it. And the headstalls were always painted. We almost always had one of the staff member in the summer who were artistic, and they would paint them. I still have mine from my pony, as a matter of fact. At that time, like I said, my sister passed away in 1952. Was the spring. This was a picture the summer before with her in silhouette, her horse Major, and her saddle. That saddle I rode until we sold the ranch in 1974. It's a wonderful saddle. And it was all carved. It had been made specially for her. At that time, I was small, and the burro Eleanor the Burro was a wonderful story to carry and have around. Eleanor came from Fan Valley Ranch, and she would never stay at Fan Valley Ranch. She would always wander down the road. And then finally, babies gave her, I guess, to Daddy and Mom, but the burro didn't stay at either place. All summer long, the burro traveled. In the morning, it was at the back door, and all the leftover pancakes and leftover toast had to be saved and given to the burro. Then the burro would wander up the road 3 miles and be at the Fan Valley Ranch late afternoon into dinner time. So Eleanor moved up and down the valley, and she was a treasured old pet eventually that just was there. She liked candy bars, big time. And we didn't have a concession, but we had a desk tray basically that had, half a dozen kinds of gum in it and 2 or 3 candy bars. I don't remember what else. Ice savers, that was fun. Anyway, Eleanor was standing in the yard and she was coughing and gagging and carrying on something terrible. And my dad told the boys at the barn to get her out of the yard, boys, she's gonna die. About an hour later, Eleanor was back, and she was just fine. So Dad lined all the kids up and asked them about it. And one of the guest boys had bought a dozen candy bars for her, and she wanted them so badly he gave them to her all at once. And then all 12 candy bars were stuck in her throat. She survived. Very long life. And I'm seeing my time is about up. I have other stories, but the only other one that I'm really interested in talking about, and I'm not sure if any of you participated in these. Julia, my niece in the middle there, may have, but I'm not sure. And every year at the Protestant church, at Christmas time, and we had 2 churches, the Catholic and the Presbyterian. Community celebration was always held at the community church. And it was very traditional in style. Everyone was welcome, and I think most everybody came. And for those of you who still live there, the church is knotty pine walls with knotty pine pews and altar as well as floors. A large fresh fir was always standing just below the altar, usually on the left side, so as not to interfere with the piano on the right. Sometimes both of those change. And as you know, the front wall was a really big window with 18-inch panels of glass around it. In the evening, with the candles burning, low amber lights in the rafters, it was a very moving sight, looking out on the snowy fields and pine forests. At the end of the traditional service, Santa would enter through the back with an enormous bag of treats for the children. The treats were particularly glittering, and I liked them just because of the sense of community as well as just that familiarity and how they had everybody together. My mom, because of her connections through the ranch buying groceries by the case, She would buy apples and oranges, handful of or boxes of hard nuts, sorry, and a couple of pieces of ribbon candy. Several ladies from the church would come up one day and they would put one orange, one apple, handful of nuts, couple pieces of ribbon candy, and if it was a good year, one piece of chocolate Hershey in a clear cellophane bag, and then tie it with curly ribbon. And they were so pretty and so simple and such a treasure. People don't remember, we didn't have a lot of fresh fruit. Quite often that was the only fresh fruit we got through the winter, unless you were lucky enough to get to Granby when some came in or to go to Denver. But up there we rarely did, it was all canned. So those bags were special and they were just gorgeous. They were so pretty in that lamplight. So that's kind of my story, and like I said, it's after I've been here an hour. My niece is there. My niece and I are the last two to be born on the ranch. I grew to adulthood there. She had to leave in her childhood. So we're pretty much it.
Would you
And
have
they-
about 15 more minutes, Fran?
I do?
Yeah, so you can tell some more stories. Yeah,
Oh dear.
that would be fine.
Does anybody have questions?
Julia does have some pictures too, so you might want to stand up and share your pictures too.
Well, I turn them to her and then I kind of send them around for people to look at.
Oh, I see, okay, good.
And Donna, we could, if she'll answer questions, we may have some. and that
Okay.
we can
I ain't
bring
got
back
no
around.
answers in that.
So she can hear if we sit here.
I'll pass these around. This is a picture of my grandfather and my father.
Julia's
This
passing
is
around the picture.
1935 up on the ranch, and I'll pass these around. And this one is probably my favorite picture of my whole life. It's my father and my Aunt Virginia, and I'm not sure, maybe 5, 6 years old. I'm not, the ones I showed you. What do you think? There's no,
We'd have to take it over to Donna to see the right thing.
well, I showed her earlier, yeah. I'm not really sure, I'd say maybe 6, 7 in those pictures. And I have tons and tons of pictures at home of the ranch, and it's ridiculous.
Who's sitting next to Julia
That's my
on her
roommate.
left?
That's my roommate. His name is Bruce.
Okay.
I say, Aunt Brenda, you got that for her.
That's all right.
You think you're scared of me?
Does anyone,
You want more stories, huh?
oh, better yet, let's hear stories.
Talk about spring cleaning. In order for the Dude Ranch to open in the spring, we had a great deal of spring cleaning to do. All the linens had been cleaned and stacked on the dining room tables, covered with sheets the prior fall. We would start with the main lodge, as we had to have the dining room, lobby, and first floor rooms ready to go on opening day, which was June 15th. Once the main floor and first floor rooms were done, we moved out to the 1 and 2 bedroom cabins. In mid-May, there was usually still snow with the rivers high and the water bitterly cold. And I'm sure Hal and my Jay would remember how that goes, because Dad sent you out to go through the rivers and fix fence in it. And it was cold. Anyway, our main lodge had the kitchen and a huge fireplace to heat not only the water, but the building. And it was a 3-story building. We'd stoke those fires really huge, trying to get the winter chill out of the lodge. But they were still cold, and we had to wash the walls and furniture. Actually, that was the only way to really stay warm, because you had your hands in warm water. The water was heated by flowing through the piping underneath the fireplace gate. It's quite a system. My mother wanted all the bed springs properly cleaned. You know, we didn't have box springs then. And that meant bottle brushes and little rags. And you had to clean all the connecting wires. One of the cabins, one of the ones that Julia's parents bought and that they lived in over in Winter Park, the Nimbus cabin, had a purple colored set of single springs upstairs. And they were, I'm saying elderly, and they were peeling some paint so the gray would look out under the purple paint. Bessie Bolton, who was our housekeeper, they had a place 3 miles down just before the rec bureau. And she was our head housekeeper, and she made me do those springs 3 times before she would accept it. We couldn't take them out on the lawn because Mom did not want the grass to splash up on the springs. So it was all by hand, 1 wire at a time. We also, in 1964, I came home from college with the new boyfriend, whom my father took one look at, deciding he wasn't going to be around long. Dad found a perfect way to get rid of Tom without being the bad guy. And on the Zoom tonight is a guy called Rob Wunsch, and it was his sister Daddy fought her off on. Sorry, Rob. One of the cabins, the Baker cabin, was built with a corner in the Colorado River. The Baker cabin had been built in 1945. That corner had a picture window on both sides of the north and west windows. Generally, we didn't wash those for obvious reasons. They were over the river, it was spring, it was nasty. That year, Dad decided they must be washed. My brother cranked up the Caterpillar, putting it in the river with a 2x6 to the bank from the front of the cat. He gave Tom a bucket and a rag and told him to get the windows clean. Tom was terrified of the high, cold, running water, and he didn't have a clue how to wash a window. Tom dipped the bucket into the muddy water and washed the windows with that water. And of course, we had very muddy windows. I had a housekeeper by then, and I had a fit. As planned, I figured if he was too dumb to wash a window properly, he was too dumb to have around. So that was when Elsie took him off our hands. Also, in about that same time period, we had a young girl from St. Louis. She was kind of a ditzy little gal and hadn't been out and about very much, and she tried so hard, but she had absolutely no experience. We were cleaning the first floor of rooms in the lodge. She was scrubbing the ladies' bathroom that day. At lunch, she was so pleased and told me she'd really scrubbed the bathroom and I'd be especially pleased with her. After lunch, we went back over to look at the bathroom. She'd scrubbed it all right, every square inch with Ajax. Every square inch had dried with a white film. 10 years later, when the ranch sold, we still had grit in that bathroom. I mean, we soaked it, flooded it, and never could get it all out. However, one of the great pleasures, oddly enough, in our cleaning was that the jobs that I normally did had to do with the front desk, and one of our jobs was to make the beds in the morning before the maid had time to get there, and also to wash towels and that sort of thing. Well, nobody really liked helping with the laundry, and I did, because nobody bothered me. I could do it any way I wanted to. We had one of the old Ringer double wash tubs and a big set of 2 tubs against the wall. You filled all of them with hot water. The tubs, you filled, the Ringer tubs, you filled with soap and water. And you washed it in one, wrung it into the next one. Then you swung the Ringer around and you run them into the clear water, run them another time into the last clear pile or tub of water. Then you wrung them out and put them in a big basket and carried it out to the back porch. And the back porch looked on Baker Mountain and Green Mountain and the Ditch Road, and no one came and bothered you. It was absolutely glorious. Loved washing clothes. We also had to clean a lot of Navajo rugs. The main lodge was carpeted in Navajo rugs. There was a man named Ed Green who came from Shiprock in an old hearse loaded with rugs and jewelry. Never locked it. And he would unload all the jewelry and all the rugs at night, and then he would tell you about them and lay them out on the floor. And my parents had bought rugs for the main lodge, as well all of our horses, anywhere from 70 head to 120 head of horses, had Navajo blankets to go on them. And that's one of those things, you know how smart your parents did. Years later, and I'm sure Hal will remember this, we took a ride and none of us had the old Navajo rugs for our saddle blankets. And the weather was bad and the horses had sores. I'd never had a horse with sores before. It was really phenomenal. But the ones in the lodge were bigger, and the floors were all covered. And these were all folded in a very set pattern, taken out to the front porch, which wherever one of us, there were always 2 of us, had to have cleaned the porch. The rugs went down and you unfolded them one by one, turned them over, did the back side, and then you had to be sure you turned the oily side back, fold it up, take it in, and put it back. If I had them all, I still could probably lay them out properly. We swept with a broom, not a vacuum. And all the floors were, pine boards. And they had to be swept very carefully. And it was my dad that was deaf on that. The guys at the barn knew about that because he was adamant about how they swept the barn. He was equally adamant everywhere in the building. So you had to make sure that your broom went down the grooves of the boards. Absolutely, to make sure you got all the dirt out. So there was a lot of practicality in my growing up. A lot of different people from all over the world who came there and were not full of themselves and were delightful and wonderful to have, and we treasure their memories immensely. So now I'm done.
Thank you, Fran. Thank also Lou Lybrand, Kay Berquist, who am I forgetting? Who else? Oh, and Lucy Fitch, who just isn't here, but got a delivery, for their desserts. Wasn't that great stuff? And also the next speaker in June something or another, second Tuesday, is Michael Geary, who will be talking about the good old days at the lake, at the Grand Lake Lodge. And he's part of that James family, so he knows a lot of things, so you don't want to miss that one. Can we do another round of applause? I don't know if she hears us or not. Yay. Does anybody have a question for her? Oh, great, Dana.
Well, it's not actually a question, but I'd like to tell her something.
Okay.
Okay, do you want to come up here?
You'll have to talk to
Talk
me.
there. Okay.
Yeah, and if you can talk into the microphone so we can hear.
Did you get your pictures?
Here, let's let her talk into the microphone. That way we can hear.
Okay. Hi, Fran. My name is Dana. We don't know each other. I'm new to Grand Lake. But I work at the park during the summer, and I take a lot of people out to the Holzwarth Zoo Ranch, and I talk about it a lot. I had friends from Germany this year who came out to see the Zoo Ranch. They were amazed. They thought it was just amazing. But the big part of this, I want you to understand, is that the Holzwarth family is living in history. Because one of those children who's in high school went back to school this year, and he texted me, and he wanted me to know that his teacher was talking about the Rocky Mountains, and they were talking about the Holzwarth Zoo Ranch. Wow.
That's pretty cool.
Your history is living on.
Well, Grandma her pictures were there too.
That's cool.
Okay, Dave Lively's coming down.
Hi, Dave.
Hi, Fran. Thank you so much for that great email last week. I really appreciate it. I hope you're getting all better. I'm looking forward to you coming out. Hopefully this summer we can get together again, talk about the Harbisons and the Holzworth together. You and I shared many.
That would be lovely. I would really like to do that.
I would too. Julia told me she wants me to help her with some more boxes of memorabilia at some time. So we'll get together on that too. So I just want to say a quick.
Well, thank you.
Anybody else want to say hi? The next event that's here in the building will be Pam Coonrod's Flowering of Grand Lake, so that's Saturday. So be sure you come on Saturday and get some of those little plants. This room will be full of tables covered with plants this Saturday. So come on in for that. And because of that, we do have to set up the chairs tonight, so we'll have to put them back against the wall. So, good. Thanks.
Donna, could you hold the microphone while we applaud that one?
Yeah.
Can you hear us?